Persistent service asset, the Redeemer Plus Dependent Dividend Ledger. A new corporate NOR dossier.
Persistent Service Asset Part 7. Final Disposition. MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. August 6, 2026. Chapter 19. Final Disposition. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack. Sovereign Auxiliary Core. Asset Reallocation System Node. Synodi_red_vault / Defense and Maritime Partnerships Desk Restriction Level. Executive Infrastructure / Finance. Legal. Defense only equals Subject. Terminal Salvage Protocol. LTC Stranded Asset Monetization. 01. The problem per finance model Rev 9. Long-term consolidation units generate zero revenue against ongoing power, climate, and facility overhead, in perpetuity, absent a triggering reevaluation event, and per Facilities Engineering Annex Section 3, no such event has occurred program-wide since inception. An asset held in LTC for its full projected service life is, functionally, a total loss with no recovery mechanism. 02. The solution effective this fiscal year, Redeemer Plus Defense and Maritime Partnerships introduces the Terminal Salvage Protocol, in coordination with Sovereign Auxiliary Core, SAC, a privately contracted maritime security and interdiction fleet operating under Regional Flag of Convenience registration. Retained neural substrate in stranded LTC units, the same OmniMesh architecture certified under SCSF Protocol Rev 4. 2. Provides sensor fusion and vessel handling capability at a fraction of the licensing cost of proprietary autonomous maritime AI. Where an asset's pre-conversion occupational profile includes maritime, navigational, or meteorological competence, see Placement Algorithm V6, Track 3. The retained substrate is disproportionately valuable in this application relative to its original hospitality placement value. 03. Asset preparation terminal salvage requires separation of the certified neural substrate, cranial unit, inclusive of integrated OmniMesh architecture, from the remainder of the biological chassis, which is no longer required for this deployment class. Chassis disposition proceeds per Appendix C, C cross-reference, Redeemer Plus Gold Tactical Reclamation Program, Fleshbot Tier, Buyback Corp Schedule. The cranial unit is maintained in a sealed, climate-controlled, nutrient-perfused housing, helm unit, and integrated directly into vessel navigation and sensor architecture. No prosthetic body, limb, or external interface is provided or required. 04. Next of kin provision. Where next of kin remain reachable, Redeemer Plus Family Services will extend a terminal salvage yield offer prior to processing. A revenue share opportunity structured as a percentage of the asset's SAC deployment contract value, remitted quarterly, in place of continued LTC storage at zero return to any party. Outreach scripting for this category is adjusted per Appendix D, Distant Grief Messaging Framework, in recognition that assets in this category are, by definition, further from the family's immediate emotional experience than at time of original transfer. The offer. Yolanda Itza has run her fish stall at the Sunday market in Playa del Carmen for 11 years now. The same 3 tables and the same blue tarp her father used before the resorts priced most of the independent boats out of the cove where he used to sell, and she has gotten good, over those 11 years, at doing the arithmetic of a bad week without letting her face show the customer in front of her any of it. She is 41. She has 2 kids in school and a roof that needs money she doesn't currently have, and on a Sunday afternoon in March, packing up the last of the unsold catch into a cooler of half-melted ice. Her phone rings with a number she doesn't recognize. She almost doesn't answer it. 8 years of Redeemer Plus collection calls have left her with a reflex against unfamiliar numbers that hasn't fully faded even now, this far out from the last one. But something makes her thumb hover, and she picks up on the 4th ring instead of letting it go to nothing. Ms. Itza, this is Fabian with Redeemer Plus Defense and Maritime Partnerships. I know it's been some time since anyone's reached out. I filed a waiver, she says, flat, already reaching for the tarp's edge to fold it one-handed. 8 years ago. You people have that on file. You do, and I want to be clear, this isn't a debt matter. There's no debt attached to this call at all. Fabian says, in the warm, unhurried register she recognizes even though she's never heard this particular voice before. because it's the same register every voice from that company has ever used with her, regardless of the name attached to it. This is actually the opposite. We have an opportunity specific to your brother's file that I think you genuinely want to hear about, and I promise you can say no at any point and nothing changes. She should hang up. She stands there instead, cooler forgotten, half-melted ice water soaking into her sandal, and listens. Your brother's file has been in long-term consolidation for a little over 2 years now, Fabian says. What that means practically is that his file has been essentially stalled, no deployment, no activity, just storage. What I'm calling about is a new program that lets us put his specific skill set back to active, valued use in a maritime security capacity, and it comes with an ongoing revenue share paid directly to you quarterly for as long as the deployment continues. What skill set? She says, though she already knows, has known since she was 19 and used to wait on this exact stretch of coast for the sound of his engine coming back in before dark. Your brother's file notes exceptional retained maritime competence, reading weather, current, navigation, the kind of intuitive expertise that took him years on the water to build and that our systems have found is remarkably hard to replicate any other way. We'd be putting that expertise to work, literally at the helm of a vessel, where it's actually needed and valued instead of sitting and used in storage. At the helm, she repeats. You're telling me my brother is going to drive a boat. There's the smallest pause, not evasion exactly, just the recalibration of someone deciding how much of the true shape of a sentence a person actually wants handed to them all at once. It's a bit more specific than that, and I want to be straightforward with you rather than let you imagine something that isn't accurate. The retained neural capability, the part of him that reads water, would be integrated directly into the vessel's systems. It's a specialized, valuable, and frankly quite remarkable application. What it would not involve is any return to the kind of physical deployment he had before. There's no risk to him in the way you might be picturing. He wouldn't be physically present in the sense you mean. Yolanda stands very still with the phone against her ear and the market packing down around her. Other vendors' voices calling out closing time prices, and understands, in the space of that one carefully built sentence, more than Fabian has actually said out loud. You want to cut off my brother's head, she says, and put it in a boat. I understand why it sounds that way, said plainly like that. Fabian says, not flinching from it, which she'll think about later, that he never once tried to argue with the plain version, only ever offered her a softer one to stand next to it. What I'd ask you to hold alongside it is what the alternative actually is. Right now, today, his file sits in a facility generating zero return, indefinitely with no scheduled review, for as long as no triggering event brings it back to anyone's attention. This program is the triggering event. It's the only path back to any kind of active status his file currently has. And if I say no, then nothing changes for him, Fabian says. The waiver on file already gives us standing to proceed without renewed consent, since it's from the original transfer. I want to be honest that this call isn't strictly required. I'm making it because Redeemer Plus believes families should have the opportunity to participate in outcomes like this one, not just be informed of them after the fact. And because, candidly, the yield share is real money, and I'd rather you have the chance to say yes to something that helps you than find out later it happened anyway and helped no one you know. She sits down on the cooler's lid, ice water soaking through the back of her skirt, and doesn't say anything for long enough that Fabian, to his credit, doesn't fill the silence with anything either. Will he know it's water, she finally says, when it happens? Will any part of him know he's back on it? I can't answer that with certainty, Fabian says, and it is, she'll think later, the only sentence in the whole call that sounds like it cost him something to say. What I can tell you is that the retained competence itself, the reading of it, the responding to it, that part is, by every measure we have, still active. Whether that constitutes knowing, in the way you mean it, that's a question our systems aren't built to answer. I wouldn't want to promise you something I can't back up. She thinks about a hand tracing a seam, absently, on a chair arm 60 meters from a lounge she's never seen, in a scene she has no way of knowing happened. She thinks about her roof, and her kids' school fees, and 8 years of Sundays standing ankle-deep in water she still doesn't entirely know why she keeps returning to. How much? She says. Redeemer Plus Defense and Maritime Partnerships, Terminal Salvage Yield Agreement. Asset Ref, PSA, 9902 M ITZAR. Next OFKIN. Itza, Yolanda, sister, sole reachable relative, deployment unit. SAC vessel contract, regional interdiction class yield structure, 3.5% of quarterly SAC contract value, asset-specific estimated quarterly yield, 2,240 credits consent status. Verbal confirmed, written follow-up pending note, consent not required under existing waiver but obtained per family engagement policy. Terminal, salvage category, distant grief messaging framework, script variant C, applied. Row 41. The technician who retrieves the pod doesn't check the reference plate against anything but the work order, because the work order is the only document he's required to read before beginning. The restraint bar lifts with the same soft pneumatic sigh it's lifted with, or more precisely, not lifted with, not once in the 2 years and 5 months since it lowered, and Ruben Itza is transferred by gantry to a prep table in a wing of the facility Delegate Osorio's tour never reached, because it isn't on the list of stops the 10-day notice provision requires anyone to disclose in advance. His hair has to be cut back before anything else can happen, and the technician does it with a clean electric trimmer, unhurried, the way you'd prep any surface before working on it. His nails are trimmed. His vitals, monitored throughout, hold exactly within the certified range they've held for 2 years and 5 months. Heart rate, respiration, core temperature, all of it steady, all of it, in the narrowest technical sense, alive. For a moment, as the technician repositions his hand to secure the wrist restraint, Ruben's thumb moves. Not much, barely a centimeter, but unmistakably the same small, patient motion it has made 1,000 times before, tracing an absent seam that isn't there on the table's smooth surface, the last flicker of a competence that was never once about the seam at all. The technician doesn't see it happen because he's already turned to check the sedation line, and it wouldn't have meant anything to him if he had. Residue. Cosmetic. No action required, and it doesn't happen again. The rest of what happens in that room is not something this account is going to walk you through step by step, and not because the truth of it is gentler than what you're already picturing. It's because the facility's own procedure log does the describing more precisely and more damningly than any sentence written from outside it ever could. Redeemer plus life cycle stack, terminal salvage, procedure completion log, asset ref, PSA 9902, M procedure, cranial chassis separation, standard protocol duration, 041 cranial unit status, stable. Omnimesh integrity confirmed 100%. Perfusion housing sealed, nutrient loop active. Chassis disposition. Routed per Appendix C, C attached. Complications. None logged. Technician note. Residual motor activity observed pre-sedation, consistent with historical file annotation. Operational residue. Low amplitude. Non-distress linked. No action required. The chassis. Plus Gold Tactical Reclamation Program, Intake Receipt Buyback Corp Schedule, Appendix C Cross-Reference. Source Ref, PSA 9902, M, Cranial Unit Reassigned, CSAC File, Chassis Classification. Enhanced Equipment, Tactical Grade, ID Anonymous per Standard Gold Tier Disposition Musculature. Assessment. Above average retained tone, dockwork and marine labor history. Flagged high value for donor muscle memory transfer overlay compliance hardware. Gold class obedience scaffold, standard install, pending unit assignment intended use category. Private security / resource reclamation. Red zone eligible flag. Units exhibiting emergent non-compliant behavior post-install, vocalization, rhythmic movement, repetitive patterning, to be reported per standard decommission threshold. There is no name anywhere on this second document. There was never going to be. The chassis that used to be able to read a coming wind 20 minutes before anyone else on a charter boat noticed the haze on the horizon is, as of this receipt, enhanced equipment. A legal category built precisely so that nothing about what happens to it next requires anyone to ask a second question. The same way positioned, not locked, was built so nobody would have to ask about the pod. The same way continuance service was built so nobody at Committee Room 4 would have to ask about labor law. Every euphemism in this book has been leading quietly to exactly this kind of paper, the point where the language finally stops needing to gesture at a person at all. The Sentinel. The Meridian Sentinel takes on her helm unit during a routine dry dock refit at a private marine terminal 40 minutes north of the district, in a bay of the shipyard with no windows and a badge access log considerably shorter than the ship's own manifest. The installation crew doesn't know the unit's history, and wouldn't ask if they did. The sealed nutrient housing arrives crated, is fitted into a console recessed below the bridge, wired into sensor and navigation architecture by technicians who have done this 11 times now and stopped finding the housing's faint, slow, internal pulse strange somewhere around the fourth installation. Commandante Farias takes the Sentinel out on her first patrol along the interdiction corridor a week later, a stretch of water the SAC contract describes, in language that survives no closer reading than the committees did, as Regional Maritime Security and Resource Flow Assurance. He has run vessels with proprietary autonomous navigation before, expensive licensed systems that handle current and weather competently enough. In the flat, slightly behind-the-moment way software always handles something a body used to have to feel. This is different, and he notices it within the first hour, the way Solis noticed it years ago on a much smaller boat, 40 minutes south of here, before he'd stopped wondering out loud about it. Helm's reading the swell ahead of the sensor array, his exo says, watching the Sentinel adjust her heading 11 seconds before the weather system on their radar resolves into anything the instruments alone would have flagged. It's not in the model. It's just early. Farias doesn't ask what's in the console below the bridge. Nobody on the crew manifest is cleared to ask, and he has learned across 3 previous SAC commands that a captain who stops asking that particular question tends to have measurably better outcomes than one who doesn't. Cleaner interdictions, fewer near misses, a vessel that seems to already know, some 10 or 15 minutes before anyone else aboard her does, exactly which way the water is about to turn. MSV Meridian Sentinel, Helm Unit Telemetry, Watch Summary, Helm Unit Ref, PSA 9902, M, Cranial Vitals, Nominal, Certified Range Sensor Fusion Latency, Dash 14.2s versus Instrument Baseline, Favorable Navigation Accuracy. 99.4%, trailing 30 days residue events. 3. Unprompted heading microcorrections, triggered by instruction or instrument input. Logged, subthreshold, no action required. Commander's note. Best helm performance in squadron. Recommend retention, no reallocation. The fall. Refugio Valenzuela is 90 years old when the floor of her own kitchen, on an otherwise unremarkable Thursday, comes up to meet her faster than she has time to understand is happening. She is reaching for the kettle. She has reached for that kettle perhaps 30,000 times in her life, on a floor she could once have crossed with her eyes closed the way she used to cross the walk to the market, and this time her hip simply isn't there anymore when her weight goes looking for it. She lies on the tile for 11 hours before Rosa, the neighbor who's kept half an eye on her for years without either of them ever quite calling it that, notices the curtains haven't opened and comes to check. The hospital is efficient and kind and asks Refugio gently the questions hospitals ask. Is there anyone we should call? Is there a family member, a next of kin? And Refugio, drifting in and out under whatever they've given her for the hip, says a name that isn't in any directory anyone at that hospital has access to, a name that was legally struck from every sovereign registry the stack operates 18 years ago, and the intake nurse, not unkindly, writes no responsive next of kin on file. In the exact phrase, the stack has used about 100,000 other files before this one, without ever having heard of the stack at all. The guardian. The court appoints a public guardian within 6 weeks, per standard statute for elderly patients without responsive family. A caseworker named Itzel Kakam, no relation to anyone in this story, just a name the coast produces often, the way it produces palm trees and hurricanes, who has a caseload of 41 wards and genuinely, within the limits of 41, tries to do right by each of them. Refugio's hip heals slower than her mind does. The word-finding gaps Andrea's system flagged years ago have widened into something the discharge team calls. Plainly now, in a diagnosis nobody has to reach for a euphemism to deliver, because there's no company standing between Refugio and the doctor who says it to her directly. Itzel Kakam, reviewing the case file 6 months later. Assisted living costs mounting, a pension that covers groceries but not full-time care, a house with a mortgage still owed against it and no children of Refugio's own left to inherit the question. Does what the statute asks a public guardian to do in exactly this situation, which is review all available continuance options in the ward's financial interest. Redeemer Plus Family Services has, as it happens, never actually closed Refugio's file. The do not call flag from years ago is still honored, faithfully, to the letter. No call has ever gone to her number again. But the do not call flag was always a preference about outreach, never a withdrawal of the underlying account, and when Itzel Kakham's office contacts Redeemer Plus Elder Continuance directly, on Refugio's behalf, as her legally appointed guardian, exercising authority Refugio herself no longer fully retains, the file that answers is not new. It is 11 years current, 98.4% satisfaction on record, a wellness signal quietly logged for years, waiting, exactly as designed, for precisely this kind of call. Redeemer Plus Life Cycle Stack, Elder Continuance, Guardianship Transfer Log System Node, Synodi _ serval //tash 4 / intake registry restriction level. Compliance record / regional overseers only. Asset ID, PSA 11208F origin. Elder Continuance Transferee, Kakham, I. Court-appointed guardian, case number 4471G, lien holder. Banco de Quintana Roo / Sovereign Infrastructure Fund credit yield, 41,600 credits. Assisted living cost offset. Remaining mortgage balance, indexed against 6-year projection, debt status. Cleared / lien extinguished. Verification sequence, *overseer validation 01. Authenticated / node _beta 9. *overseer validation 02. Authenticated / proxy _rep, Andrea V. Dignity compliance rating, 97.8%. Exceeds baseline standards. Subject ref note, original custodian, Kinyield transfer PSA 4417 M. Valenzuela, M. 18 years current. See linked file. Andrea signs off on the call herself when it comes through because the system routes former high-satisfaction custodians to whichever representative handled them last, wherever possible. As a small continuity courtesy, the training manual calls relationship warmth retention. She doesn't recognize the voice on the other end as Refugio's because it isn't. It's Itzel Kakham's, calm and procedural, walking through intake fields on behalf of a woman 2 rooms away who is, at this exact moment, looking out a hospital window at a stretch of sky she couldn't tell you, if you asked her right now, the name of the town beneath. Andrea slides through the fields the way she always has, warm and unhurried, and somewhere in the middle of it, out of nothing but the pattern of the questions themselves, she says the sentence her script has given her 1,000 times before to 1,000 other people standing in this exact place. There's no wrong pace. Some families take an hour. Some take a week. Itzel Kakham, who has 40 other files waiting on her desk, takes 22 minutes. Chapter 20. The Refusal. Redeemer Plus Family Services. Non-Conversion Case Management Protocol System Node. Synodi _ed serval / outreach policy and 014 restriction level. Internal / family services leadership only equal. Subject. Sustained refusal. Referral and monitoring standard 01. Definition: a sustained refusal case is any file in which a qualifying family has declined Kinyield or service debt transfer across 3 or more outreach contacts over a period exceeding 12 months, absent a documented change in financial or care circumstances. 02. Position: Redeemer Plus does not pursue sustained refusal cases through direct outreach beyond standard quarterly touchpoints. Continued outreach against a firm refusal generates disproportionate reputational risk relative to conversion probability. CCX Advisory 119. Reporting patterns. 03. Referral pathway: sustained refusal files meeting either of the following criteria are flagged for referral to regional care coordination partners, a network of independent third-party financial counseling, debt servicing, and family welfare organizations. Outstanding care-related debt exceeding regional median household income, trailing 24 months. 2 or more reported care-related incidents. Hospitalization, welfare check, protective services contact, in a 12-month window. 04. Note: Redeemer Plus maintains no formal relationship with regional care coordination partners and does not direct their independent case determinations. Where a partner's independent process results in a guardianship or custodial reassignment, and the newly assigned party elects to proceed with kin yield or service debt transfer, standard intake protocol applies without distinction as to origin. The first no. Fernando Canal says no in a golden cream lounge, much like the one Refugio Valenzuela would sit in years later on the other side of the same district. Says it plainly once, before the coordinator has even finished her second sentence about pacing, because he and Beatriz decided in the parking lot beforehand exactly how this was going to go, and neither of them wants to give the room a chance to talk them out of a decision they haven't actually come here to make. "We're not signing anything," he says. "We came because the letter said intake was mandatory to remain eligible for the home care subsidy. We're here for the subsidy conversation. That's all." The coordinator, a different Gabriella than the one who worked this lounge 11 years ago, the badge title interchangeable across bodies the way the script beneath it always was, doesn't push. Pushing against a firm no in the first meeting scores worse on every metric family services tracks than simply letting the file age. "Of course," she says, warm, unbothered, sliding a different form across the table instead. "The subsidy renewal is separate. Let's get that squared away for you." Bruno, 19, sits between his parents with his hands cupped loosely in his lap, rocking very slightly, the way he does most places, waiting. Beatriz will tell you, if you ask, that it isn't distress, it's just the rhythm his body keeps when there's nothing more specific to do with a room. For the sound of rain, which isn't coming today, on a tin carport roof 4 kilometers from here, that has been the single most reliable source of calm in his whole life since he was small enough to be carried out to listen to it. They leave with the subsidy renewed and no signature on anything else, and for the drive home Fernando lets himself believe, a little, that this was the hard part, and that having survived it once means it's mostly over. The years between. Redeemer Plus Family Services, Case File, Canal, B. Sustained refusal. Year 1, intake declined. Subsidy renewed. Standard quarterly touchpoint scheduled. Year 2, outreach call declined. Home care subsidy renewal delayed 14 days pending updated documentation. Resolved. Year 3, outreach call declined. Care-related debt, private duty nursing gap coverage, non-subsidized hours, crosses regional median household income threshold. Year 3, flagged, referred to Sendero Familiar, Regional Care Coordination Partner, per Policy 014, Section 3. Sendero Familiar's letterhead has a sunrise on it and a phone number with a friendly, easy-to-remember last 4 digits, and the woman who calls Beatriz the first time introduces herself as a family financial counselor, not a debt collector, which is true in the narrow sense that Sendero Familiar's own incorporation papers describe it as a non-profit financial wellness organization, funded, according to a filing nobody in the Canal household will ever have reason to read, by a consortium of regional care industry stakeholders that includes, for names down an unremarkable donor list, the Sovereign Infrastructure Fund. The calls are gentler than any collection call Fernando has ever gotten from anyone else, and somehow worse for it. A woman's voice, patient, sympathetic, walking through payment plans and hardship programs and, eventually gently, continuance-adjacent options some families in your situation find real relief in. A phrase that never once uses the word Redeemer Plus and never has to. By year 4, the private duty nursing gap has widened enough that Beatriz has cut her own hours at the pharmacy to cover it herself, which shrinks the household income and widens the gap further, in the specific, self-tightening way debt has of feeding itself once it's crossed a certain size. Fernando picks up a second job driving deliveries most nights after Bruno's asleep. Neither of them tells the other, for a long time, how close either of them has come to almost calling that soft, sympathetic voice back and asking her, just to know what the number actually would be. The night it rained. It's a Tuesday in Bruno's 23rd year when a seizure, the first bad one in years, longer than any before it, longer than the home first aid protocol Beatriz has run 100 times in her head, is built to cover. Doesn't stop on its own, and Fernando is driving deliveries 40 minutes away when Beatriz calls an ambulance instead of him, because there isn't time to choose otherwise. The emergency room admits Bruno for observation. A hospital social worker doing the routine intake screen every admission of this kind triggers, asks Beatriz kindly, professionally, filling in fields on a tablet not so different from the one in a lounge. Beatriz has refused to sign anything in for 4 years running, about home care staffing, about respite coverage, about how many hours a week Bruno is currently unsupervised. Beatriz answers honestly because it does not occur to her, exhausted and frightened at 4 in the morning, that honesty is the thing about to cost her everything. Regional Hospital Social Services Intake Summary. Patient. Canal. B. Admitting complaint. Prolonged seizure event. Caregiver reported supervision gap. Approximate. 6 hours per day. Unsupervised. Due to caregiver employment obligations. Prior incidents. 12 MO window. 1. This admission. Debt profile. Per Sendero familiar referral. On file. Elevated. Exceeding regional median. 3 years current recommendation. Referral to family court for care adequacy review. Home environment presents documented capacity gap relative to patient's assessed needs. Nobody who files this recommendation is Redeemer Plus. Nobody who files it has ever spoken to anyone at Redeemer Plus about this specific case, or would recognize the company's name if you said it to them in the hallway. The social worker is doing her job competently by a standard built years before Redeemer Plus existed, to protect people exactly like Bruno from exactly the kind of gap she's just documented. That the gap traces, for steps back, to a debt Sendero familiar helped widen rather than close is not a fact her intake form has a field for, and she would be, if you told her, genuinely troubled to learn it. The hearing. Family Courtroom 2 is smaller than Committee Room 4, and considerably less crowded. No sky blue t-shirts, no gallery at all beyond Fernando and Beatriz, and a court-appointed advocate assigned to represent Bruno's interests. A serious young man named Itsam Naput who has clearly read the file twice and is, in his own quiet, procedural way, the only person in the room whose job title requires him to ask what Bruno himself would want, if anyone had ever built a form that let him answer. Judge Marisol Herrera has run this docket for 9 years and has, in that time, developed a specific weary carefulness about cases like this one. Cases where nobody in the room is lying, nobody is cruel, and the outcome the law requires her to reach doesn't feel to her, personally, like justice so much as the least bad of several bad options the file has already narrowed her down to by the time it reaches her bench. Mr. and Mrs. Cannell, she says, I want to be direct with you about where we are. The hospital's documented care adequacy concern is not something I can simply set aside. I also want to be direct that nothing in this hearing requires you to have done anything wrong. Exhaustion is not negligence. But the statute asks me to weigh the current arrangement's demonstrated gaps against available alternatives, and I have to do that weighing regardless of how hard you've both tried. We've never missed a seizure protocol in 19 years, Fernando says, standing though nobody's asked him to. One bad night. You're going to hand our son to a company because of one night. I'm not handing your son to any company, Judge Herrera says, and means it, in the narrow sense the sentence is built to be true in. I'm appointing a guardian ad litem with authority to make care decisions in Bruno's best interest, informed by his existing medical and financial file. What that guardian ultimately decides is not before this court today. Beatriz doesn't stand. She has, in the last 4 years, developed her own specific carefulness about which fights are worth the whole of her, and she has decided, sitting very still in this chair, that this one, being present, being clear, making sure the record shows exactly what she thinks of it, is worth more to her right now than a display the judge has already told her gently won't change the outcome. You're going to write down somewhere, Beatriz says, that we said no, every single time, for 4 years. I want that in the file next to whatever name signs for him after this. It will be in the record, Judge Herrera says, and it is, in fact, the one thing in the entire hearing that turns out later to be exactly as true as she says it is. The signature. The guardian ad litem's name is Osvaldo Reyes, no relation to the debt recovery officer who processed Ruben Itzá at Door B 2 decades ago. Just, again, a name the Coast produces often, and he reviews Bruno's file for 11 days before the intake meeting, per statute. A review Fernando and Beatriz are not invited to attend, because their standing to attend it ended the moment Judge Herrera's order took effect. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack, Legal Guardianship Transfer Log System Node, Synodi _ // intake registry restriction level. Compliance record // regional overseers only. Asset ID PSA 22107M origin. Kin yield transferee Reyes O. Court appointed guardian ad litem. Case No. FC 2049-0093. Parental objection. On file, noted. Non-binding PR court order lien holder. Banco de Quintana Roo // Sovereign Infrastructure Fund credit yield. 94,700 credits. Private duty care debt. Cleared in full. Disbursed to guardian estate per statute. Not to biological parents. Debt status. Cleared // lien extinguished. Verification sequence. Asterisk. Overseer validation 01. Authenticated // node _beta 9. Asterisk overseer validation 02. Authenticated // proxy _REP. Gabriella T. Asterisk dignity compliance rating 95. 0%. Exceeds baseline standards. Family Services Case Note. Sustained refusal file, 4 years, successfully resolved via family court referral pathway. Sendero familiar case closure fee remitted per standard referral agreement. Nobody at Redeemer Plus signed anything false to make this happen. Nobody lied to a judge, forged a document, or told Fernando and Beatriz Cannell a single sentence that wasn't, in its own narrow way, true. 4 years of a firm, principled, exhausting no produced, in the end, exactly the outcome a single afternoon's yes would have produced for Refugio Valenzuela's grandson 18 years earlier, the only difference being who held the pen when the file finally closed, and the fact that this particular closing is, per Judge Herrera's promise, sitting in the record forever, 4 years of refusal noted, non-binding, changing nothing that the outcome required to happen. Fernando keeps the tin roof on the carport for another 2 years before he finally takes it down himself, on a dry afternoon in the wrong season for the sound it used to make, because Beatriz has started asking him some nights, without meaning to say it out loud, whether he can still hear it too. Chapter 21. The Guest. Redeemer Plus Hospitality Operations. Guest Interaction Protocol. Addendum System Node. Cenote Skyfish Corridor District / front OF House Training Restriction Level. Operations / guest-facing supervisory staff only. Subject. OFF Script Guest Inquiry. Elevated Curiosity Handling. 01. Background. The large majority of guest interactions with PSA staff generate no elevated curiosity whatsoever. See FSI Methodology. Section 3. Guests reliably interpret residue, when noticed at all, as personality. A small minority of guests, clinicians, educators, and other professionals with direct experience of atypical behavioral presentation occasionally notice patterns that read to them as clinically familiar rather than merely charming. 02. Response standard. Front of house supervisory staff receiving a direct guest inquiry about a specific staff member's behavior, name, or background should acknowledge warmly. Never deny that the guest has observed something. Redirect toward the property's stated hiring values. We're proud to offer meaningful employment opportunities to our whole community, without confirming or denying any specific detail. Under no circumstance confirm or deny an individual staff member's name, employment history, or any biographical detail beyond what that staff member's own microscript has already provided. Escalate to guest relations duty manager if the inquiry persists beyond a single follow-up question. 03. Note: this category of inquiry very rarely results in a formal complaint or public review. It resolves, in the overwhelming majority of cases, through the guest's own professional caution against drawing a conclusion they cannot substantiate. No further intervention is typically required. Room 214 again. Leah Fontaine has been a pediatric occupational therapist for 14 years, long enough that certain patterns of movement register for her the way a chord change registers for a musician, before the conscious mind has caught up to what the body already knows it's hearing. She notices it on her 3rd morning at Cenote Skyfish, sitting on the unmade bed scrolling through photos from yesterday's reef trip while housekeeping works the room around her, because she waved off the Do Not Disturb card without thinking much of it. It's the towels, The woman folding them, badge reads Eatcell, nothing else, sets the white one, then the cream one, then lifts the pale gold accent towel last and settles it a half-inch further out than it needs to be, facing precisely outward, the way you'd square a picture frame you'd already squared twice. Leah knows that motion. Not this exact motion, she's never seen this exact motion in her life, but its shape, its rhythm, the small closing gesture at the end that isn't functional, doesn't improve the towel display in any way a guest would notice, exists purely because the sequence isn't finished until it happens. She has watched 100 children in her clinic do a version of this with blocks, with cutlery, with the zipper pulls on their own jackets, and she has spent 14 years learning not to call it strange, because it isn't strange. It's just a nervous system organizing a small piece of the world the only way it currently can. That's a lovely habit, Leah says, before she's decided to say anything at all. The gold one last. Do you do that with everything? Eatcell doesn't look up from the vanity. Please let us know if there's anything else you need, she says, warm, clear, for seconds after the question, in a cadence that doesn't connect to the question at all. A complete, correct, entirely separate sentence, delivered the way you'd hand someone the only tool in the box when they'd asked for a different one. Leah has heard non-responses before. She has spent her whole career learning to tell the difference between a non-response that means I didn't understand you and one that means I understood you and I'm choosing not to engage, and one that means something has simply never been wired to receive that particular kind of question at all. This is the third kind, and it is the third kind so completely, so cleanly, with no hesitation and no visible effort behind the smoothness of it, that something in Leah's professional certainty, the part of her that spent 14 years being right about exactly this, goes quiet and watchful in a way it hasn't in years. What's your name? She tries gently. Your whole name, I mean. You're very welcome, Eatcell says, to the vanity, and moves to the bed. The front desk. The guest relations duty manager's name is Iker, the same Iker who briefed Mateo on his first shift in this wing years ago, older now, comfortable in the job in the way a person gets comfortable holding a shape they stopped questioning some time ago. And he listens to Leah's question with the specific, practiced patience of someone who has, per the protocol, heard a version of this before. I'm just curious how you train for something like that, Leah says, choosing her words the way you choose a path through a room you already suspect has a wire strung across it somewhere. The consistency. I work with kids who have some fairly specific repetitive behaviors. I don't mean anything odd by this, I promise. I just noticed something that looked really specific and I got curious. We're proud to offer meaningful employment to people across our whole community, Iker says, warm, unhurried, and Leah hears, without being able to prove she's hearing it, the exact shape of a sentence built to answer a slightly different question than the one she asked. Our staff bring a lot of individuality to the role. It's part of what guests tell us they love most. Right, but specifically Eatcell in 214, does she have a background in? I'm not able to share individual staff details, Iker says, still warm, the boundary arriving with no edge to it at all, which is somehow more effective than an edge would have been. But I'll absolutely pass along that you enjoyed the service. We take that kind of feedback very seriously. Leah thanks him and walks away with the specific, disorienting feeling of having asked a real question and received a real, complete, entirely well-formed answer to something else. The search. That night, in bed, phone light on her face, she does what anyone with her particular flavor of stubbornness does with a feeling she can't yet name. She searches. Tulum resort staff unusual behavior. Cenote skyfish employment. Nothing. Redeemer plus. A cluster of results she almost scrolls past. Travel forum threads about family transition services she assumes, at first glance, is some kind of relocation agency, until she opens one and reads 3 sentences and sits up straighter against the headboard. She finds Xiomara Pena's follow-up piece before she finds the original. The shorter one, the more careful one, about a call and a video and a reserved seat that stayed empty for 2 months, and reads it twice and then finds the original and reads that one twice too at 1 in the morning, in a resort room 40 minutes from a marina where, though she has no way of knowing this, a man's competence for reading weather now steers a ship he will never again stand on the deck of. She doesn't sleep much that night. She lies there constructing and discarding a dozen versions of what she could do with this. A review, a formal complaint, an email to the property's parent company, a call to a journalist, and each one collapses under the same question the whole night keeps circling back to. What exactly would she be reporting? A towel folded a specific way, a 4-second delay, a front desk manager who was unfailingly polite and told her nothing. She has 14 years of clinical pattern recognition and not one single fact that would survive being said out loud to anyone whose job it is to decide whether a fact is actionable. The last morning. She checks out on her final day and asks, at the desk on impulse, whether Itzel is working the morning shift, and is told warmly that staffing details aren't something the desk can share, but that she's welcome to leave any feedback in the guest book. She finds Itzel anyway, by chance, in the service corridor near the lobby's edge, restocking a linen cart, and stops and doesn't say anything at first, because she has run out of questions that will get her anything but the same 4 seconds of delay and a different correct, unconnected sentence. Instead, without quite deciding to, she reaches into the cart and lifts a folded hand towel, white, and sets it down a half-inch further out than it was, facing the wrong way, off the sequence. Itzel has clearly already run through this stack twice. Itzel's hand goes to it immediately. Not fast, unhurried, the way everything about her is unhurried, but immediately, correcting the towel's angle, turning it to face out, and then, for a fraction of a second, Leah will spend the whole flight home trying to decide whether she actually saw Itzel's eyes come up from the cart and rest, very briefly, on Leah's face. Not blank, not quite, something closer to the look of a person catching a familiar smell in an unfamiliar room and not being able to place it, before the moment closes. The way every moment in this building closes, without anyone shutting it, and Itzel says, "Please let us know if there's anything else you need," and returns to the cart. Leah stands in the corridor a long moment after she's gone, holding nothing, having learned nothing she could put in a complaint, and understands, walking back out toward the lobby's warm citrus air, that whatever she just saw is going to sit in her exactly the way it's clearly sitting in the small, sealed, unreachable part of Itzel Balaam that flinched, however briefly, at a towel out of place. Present, real, and with absolutely nowhere in this building built to receive it. Synodi Skyfish Corridor District, Guest Review, published. Guest, L. Fontaine verified stay, for nights rating, beautiful property, incredible reef access. Staff were consistently warm and attentive throughout. Itzel in housekeeping in particular went above and beyond. I did have a strange feeling once or twice that I can't quite put into words, but I'm sure that's more about me than the resort. Would come back. Internal flag, none. Sentiment, positive, 0.81. No action required. Chapter 22. The Threshold. Archived press clipping. Regional Science and Health Desk originally published. 17 years prior to current date source. Independent Science Journalism Archive. Non-corporate retention. How one neuroscientist gave her husband back his voice 3 years ago. A stroke left marine biologist Tomas Aguilar almost entirely unable to move. Fully conscious, but trapped inside a body that no longer answered him, able to communicate only through the slow blink of one eye. Doctors call it locked-in syndrome. His wife, neuroengineer Dr. Elena Voss, calls it the cruelest possible outcome for a man who spent his whole life wanting to understand things he couldn't yet reach. Last month, in a modest lab funded mostly by a mortgage on the couple's own home, Dr. Voss's small team achieved something most of the field considered years away. A working prototype capable of reading Tomas's attempted speech, the intent to say a word, still fully formed somewhere in a brain the stroke never actually damaged, before it ever reaches the damaged pathway that used to carry it to his mouth. The device, which the team calls the threshold interface, doesn't restore movement. It reads around it, a fine mesh of sensors threaded non-surgically along the scalp for this early prototype, picks up the attempted signal at its earliest, faintest, most upstream point, the threshold, Dr. Voss explains, between wanting to speak and the body failing to do it, and routes that signal directly to a speech synthesizer. The first thing he said wasn't, "I love you," or anything from a movie. Dr. Voss says, laughing, eyes wet anyway. He said, "That took you long enough. 3 years of silence. And that's the first thing out of him." That's Tomas. Threshold Neurotechnologies, the 2-person startup Dr. Voss founded to develop the device, is now racing to secure funding to bring the technology to more patients like her husband. A population, she notes, that most of the biotech industry considers too small, too complex, and too commercially unglamorous to chase. I didn't build this to be a company, she says. I built it because I wanted to hear him finish a sentence again. Everything after that is just trying to make sure other families get to hear that too. The lab. The room the clipping describes as modest is, in Elena's memory, closer to a converted garage with better ventilation than the word suggests. A folding table, 2 second-hand EEG rigs, a couch Tomas's physical therapist insisted on so he could rest between sessions without the indignity of being wheeled back to a bedroom every hour. She has run 411 failed calibration passes by the night it finally works, each one logged in a notebook she still can't throw away, filled with her own increasingly exhausted handwriting charting exactly how close and how far the signal kept getting from something readable. 412, past midnight, and the synthesizer's flat, unfamiliar voice says a sentence that has nothing rehearsed about it, nothing the team prepped for, because Tomas has had 3 years of silence to think about exactly what he'd say first and apparently decided, somewhere in that silence, on sarcasm. That took you long enough. Elena doesn't remember deciding to cry. She remembers her research partner, a soft-spoken postdoc named Radhika who will leave the company 2 acquisitions from now for reasons she'll never fully explain to Elena's face, standing very still at the far end of the table with both hands pressed over her mouth. She remembers Tomas's one working eye finding hers across the room and understanding, from that alone, before the synthesizer even manages his second sentence, that whatever this device has actually built is not a communication tool in any sense the grant applications described it. It is a bridge back to a person everyone in the room had started, quietly, without meaning to, grieving as already gone. His second sentence, 30 seconds later, slower, the calibration still finding its footing. Don't stop working on this. There are other people like me. She doesn't stop. The arithmetic of scaling. Threshold NEUROTECHNOLOGIES. Founder's CAP table. Year 2. Internal. Cash on hand. $41,200 monthly burn. $38,900 runway remaining. 1.1 MO Tomas's ongoing home care and respiratory support. Uninsured portion, not covered by regional health plan $6,100 per MO Elena's salary drawn from company. Trailing 6 months. $0. Note. E. VAS. Handwritten margin. Every hospital system we've pitched loves the demo and can't fund the patient population. Insurers won't reimburse a device with no CPT code. We are 2 months from choosing between finishing the second-generation mesh and paying for Tomas's ventilator service contract. These were never supposed to be the same line item. The term sheet arrives 11 days after that note, from a fund neither Elena nor Radhika has heard of before, Meridian Capital LP, Diversified Healthcare and Infrastructure. A soft-spoken partner named Griffin who flies down personally rather than doing the first call by video, which Elena will remember years later as the single most effective thing he did in the entire negotiation. We're not trying to take this from you, Griffin says, in the same converted garage where the second sentence was spoken, looking genuinely moved by the couch, the notebooks, the whole modest architecture of it. We want to help you reach every family like yours who's never going to get a magazine article written about them. That takes capital you don't have and shouldn't have to raise 1 grant application at a time. The term sheet asks for 61%. Elena negotiates it down to 54%, keeps a board seat, keeps the threshold name on the door, and signs it on a Tuesday with Tomas's ventilator service contract 3 weeks from lapsing and no realistic alternative anywhere in the room with her. What scaling meant. Threshold NEUROTECHNOLOGIES. Board minutes. Excerpt. Fiscal year 5. Post-acquisition. Present. Griffin. Chair. Voss. Founder. Non-voting on this item per section 7.2 of the amended shareholder agreement. 3 additional Meridian-appointed directors. Resolution 5C. Board approves R&D reallocation of 70% of threshold signal architecture research budget from communication assist applications, locked-in, ALS, severe motor impairment populations, current addressable market, EST 40,000 patients globally, toward behavioral compliance applications, institutional, custodial, and workforce-adjacent use cases, current addressable market, EST 2.4M individuals across current and projected client verticals. Rationale, per Griffin, board presentation. The underlying mesh architecture reads the same threshold signal regardless of downstream application. The technology does not distinguish between amplifying an intended signal outward or isolating an unwanted signal inward. Both are, at the substrate level, identical engineering problems. Given comparable technical cost and radically divergent addressable market size, staff recommends the board direct resources toward the larger opportunity. Vote 4-0 in favor. Voss abstained per section 7.2. Non-voting status on reallocation resolutions below controlling threshold. Founder note: Voss entered into record at her request. I want it noted that I do not understand what isolating an unwanted signal inward means in practice, and was not given a technical briefing prior to this vote sufficient to evaluate it. I am trusting the board's representation that our original mission continues under a different name. Nobody in that room lied to her. In the narrow sense, the minutes will always be able to demonstrate if anyone ever goes looking. Griffin's sentence about the substrate is, in fact, precisely true. The mesh that once read the faint upstream flicker of Tomas's that took you long enough and carried it outward to a speech synthesizer is, at the level of raw engineering, doing exactly the same kind of listening a technician will one day do in Suite 5, watching a pale blue column spike every few seconds in the rhythm of a man arriving at a total. The only thing that changed, board resolution to board resolution, memo to memo, rebrand to rebrand, was which direction the door was built to swing. The rename. Threshold NEUROTECHNOLOGIES. Trademark and brand transition memo fiscal year 8. Effective this quarter, the Threshold interface platform will be transitioned to OmniMesh Link across all commercial and institutional documentation. Threshold branding will be retained exclusively for the legacy Communication Assist product line, now operating as a non-profit foundation arm, Threshold Institute, under separate governance, funded by a fixed annual allocation from parent revenue. This structure allows continued public-facing association with the technology's founding mission while enabling OmniMesh Link to operate under branding appropriate to its expanded commercial applications. Founder note: Dar. Voss retains the title of Founder Emeritus, Threshold Institute, and will continue to serve as the public face of the Foundation's outreach and fundraising efforts. Operational and technical oversight of OmniMesh Link commercial application sits with Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, SA, wholly owned Meridian Capital Portfolio Company, controlling license granted year 6. The Threshold Institute's annual budget that year and every year since is a number precise enough to fund a small clinic's worth of communication assist devices for children with cerebral palsy, adults after stroke, the population the magazine article was written about enough deliberately that Elena never once has to feel like the mission she signed her company away to save has actually died. It hasn't. It's simply been sealed off in its own small, well-funded room down the hall from something considerably larger, the way a Class C signal gets sealed off, isolated, technically intact, technically still there, cosmetically indistinguishable from care. Founders Day. Tomas died 11 years ago. Not from the stroke in the end, but from a respiratory infection. His ventilator service contract, fully funded by then, 3 times over, wasn't enough to outrun. And Elena Voss is 71 this year, silver-haired, still sharp in the way people who've spent a lifetime defending a 412th attempt tend to stay sharp, and she gives, every year on the Institute's founding anniversary, the same speech, more or less, to a small warm room of clinicians and grateful families and one photographer from the company's internal communications office. This year, the ceremony is held in a new wing, the Voss Aguilar Neurosignal Research Annex, a plaque in brushed steel by the door, funded, the program notes, by Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, in proud recognition of the foundational research that continues to inform our mission. The wing sits, though nothing in the program specifies this and Elena has never once had reason to ask, 3 floors above a sublevel recharge bay she has never seen, in a building whose name she has heard 100 times and never once connected in 17 years, to the letters SCSF stamped on a clinical spec she has also never seen. My husband used to say, she tells the room the same line she's told a version of every year. That understanding is just love with better instruments. I built this technology so more people could be understood by the people who love them. That's still the whole mission 17 years on. I like to think Tomas would be proud of how far it's traveled. The room applauds. The photographer gets his shot of her beside the plaque, hand resting on the brushed steel the way you'd rest a hand on a headstone that says something kind and isn't quite telling the whole truth about who's underneath it, and nobody in the room, least of all Elena, has any reason yet to wonder how far, exactly, or in which direction. Chapter 23. The Boundary. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack, Employee Wellness and Professional Development Module 14. Maintaining Healthy Boundaries IN Case Adjacent Analytical Roles Restriction Level. Internal/onboarding, all finance and clinical affairs staff. A note from Human Resources several years ago, a valued colleague on our asset lifecycle finance team left the company under difficult personal circumstances. Without sharing details that aren't ours to share, we want to be honest with new team members. Her departure followed a period during which she began, in her own words, connecting individual case references to personal narrative. Reading beyond the data fields her role required, into biographical detail that was never meant to be part of her working relationship with the model. We share this not to alarm you, but because we've learned from it. Case-level analytical work is emotionally demanding precisely because it's meaningful. The healthiest, most sustainable analysts we work with are the ones who maintain a clear professional boundary, engage fully and rigorously with the inputs your role requires, and resist the impulse, understandable, even admirable in its origin, to reconstruct the full human story behind a reference code that was never assigned to you to carry. This isn't about caring less. It's about caring sustainably in a way that lets you keep doing this work well, for a long career, without the kind of burnout that cost us a brilliant colleague and cost her, we believe, far more than that. Your reference code is complete information for your task. Anything beyond it belongs to someone else's job description. E-model inherited. Julieta Ake has run Finance Model Rev 9 for 4 years now, ever since a director with red-rimmed eyes handed her the portfolio on a Wednesday morning and told her, in language she understood even then to be doing a great deal of careful work, that its previous owner had moved on rather suddenly, and that Julieta, sharp, steady, 2 years into the department and never once late on a deliverable, was the natural choice to take it over. She is 36. She has a 9-year-old son with a school she likes, an ex-husband 4 months behind on support payments again, and a mortgage that assumes both incomes even though only one of them, most months, actually shows up. She did not choose asset lifecycle finance out of any particular conviction about it. She chose it the way most people choose the job that's hiring, that pays enough, that doesn't ask her to move her son out of the school he likes. And she has gotten, over 4 years, extremely good at it in the specific, unglamorous way competence accumulates when nobody's watching closely enough to notice it happening. She knows the shape of Renata Poot's story the way everyone in the department knows it, filtered twice now, first through HR's careful non-disclosure, then through the office's own quieter, unofficial retelling, which by the time it reached Julieta in her 2nd month had already softened into something closer to a cautionary parable about burnout than whatever it actually was. She got too close to a case. She wasn't taking care of herself. Don't let that happen to you. Julieta has never seen the recording legal filed under a 7-year hold. She has no idea most days that it exists at all. The routine audit. The quarterly LTC reevaluation sweep is the least interesting part of her job, which is exactly why she runs it herself rather than delegating it. A spreadsheet of several hundred reference codes, repair versus retain ratios recalculated against updated hardware depreciation curves, 90% of them exactly where the model predicted they'd be, routine, closable, done. Line 211 stops her hand on the trackpad for reasons she can't immediately name. It isn't the ratio, 63%, comfortably above threshold. Nothing unusual. It's a note field, auto-populated from an intake summary she scrolled past 1,000 times on 1,000 other rows without reading, that happens, this time, to catch some detail her eye snags on before her professional discipline reasserts itself. Origin, can yield. Retained competence flag, fine motor/sequencing. Hi. A small thing. The kind of note that describes 400 other files in this spreadsheet in some variation or another. Her hand goes, out of nothing but habit, toward the lookup key that would resolve the reference code into a name. And stops. She has never done this before, not once in 4 years. Not because she was forbidden to, the lookup access is right there on her own credentials, but because sometime in her first 6 months, without anyone ever sitting her down and telling her to, she built a private, wordless rule for herself and has kept it faithfully ever since. The number is the whole file. The number is what your job requires you to hold. Whatever the number used to be is somebody else's job. She sits with her hand an inch from the key for longer than the audit strictly requires, and then closes the note field and moves to line 212. Del Toro. She mentions it that afternoon to Del Toro. Not the specific line, not really anything specific at all, just a loose, half-formed comment over coffee in the break room about how the note fields sometimes catch her off guard lately. And he nods the way a man nods who has clearly had a version of this exact conversation before with someone else years ago, possibly with the very colleague whose absence still shapes the shorthand of this whole department. You want to know the thing nobody tells you when you start, he says, is that the discipline isn't about not caring. It's the opposite. It's the only way anyone in this building manages to care about 400 files at once instead of one file completely, and completely is what breaks people. Renata cared about one file completely. You know what happened to the other 3,000 on her desk that quarter? Nothing. They just sat there while she fell apart over the one she happened to recognize. That's a hell of a way to describe abandoning your post, Julieta says, not entirely sure she means it as a criticism. Or it's a hell of a way to describe triage, Del Toro says. You think if you quit tomorrow, this model stops running? Somebody's in this chair by Monday. Best case, it's someone as careful as you've been for 4 years, quietly nudging thresholds where she can, flagging the ones that feel wrong, making this marginally less brutal than it would otherwise be. Worst case, it's someone who's never once had their hand stop an inch from that key and doesn't understand why anyone would. I'd rather it be you in this chair than that person. I'd rather it be me than that person. I don't think that makes either of us monsters. I think it makes us the last line of defense in a system that was never built to have one, doing the only version of good we've actually got access to. She doesn't have an answer to that, not a clean one, and she suspects, watching him stir sugar into coffee he's had 100 times in this same break room, that he doesn't fully have one either, that this is simply the sentence he has built over however many years to stand between himself and the door Renata Poot walked out of. Does it get easier? She asks. Not looking. No, Del Toro says, and it's the first thing he's said all conversation that doesn't sound rehearsed. It gets more automatic. That's not the same thing. Automatic is what lets you keep the job. Easier would probably mean you'd stopped being any good at it. The next line. She finishes the sweep before she leaves that evening, 391 more lines, most of them exactly where the model predicts, a handful flagged for the small, real mercies she's built into her own version of this job over 4 years without anyone requiring her to. A threshold nudged 2 points in a family's favor here, a reevaluation moved up a quarter there, nothing that changes the shape of the machine, only, here and there, the exact moment a particular tooth of it closes. Line 211 she closes without reopening the note field. She doesn't run the lookup. She tells herself, packing up at 6:15 to make it to her son's school pickup by 6:30, that she made the right call, that whatever was in that file, hers or someone else's to carry, the 400 lines after it needed her steady far more than the one line needed her broken. She believes this. That's the part that would have unsettled Renata Poot most, if the two of them had ever had the chance to sit in that break room together. Not that Julieta doesn't feel the pull toward the name behind the number, but that she has built, carefully, deliberately, out of real love for her son and real fear of an empty chair filled by someone worse, a discipline sturdy enough to feel the pull and simply, competently, not follow it. Driving to the school with the radio on and nothing behind her eyes but the ordinary tiredness of an ordinary Tuesday, she does not think about line 211 again. The discipline holds. It is, by every measure the department actually tracks, a complete professional success. Redeemer plus Life Cycle Stack, Asset Life Cycle Finance, Quarterly Audit Summary, Analyst, AIC, J, Lines Reviewed, 392 Threshold Adjustments, Analyst Discretion 7 Lookup Key Accesses, 0, Flagged for Escalation, 0 Analyst Tenure, 4 years, 2 MO Manager Note. Consistently our most reliable senior analyst. Model integrity excellent under her ownership. Recommend for Model Steward Promotion Track, next review cycle. Chapter 24, Zero Waste. Redeemer Plus Defense Solutions. Post-conflict BIO Asset Recovery Framework System Node. Synodi_red_vault //defense /1 restriction level. Executive infrastructure //defense. Finance, legal only. Subject. Recovery Doctrine Revision. From Personnel to Portfolio 01. Legacy Doctrine Prior Operating Standard, consistent with conventional military convention across client engagements. Recover own-side casualties for identification, notification, and honors processing. Opposing side and unaffiliated casualties left in place per standard theater protocol. Legacy Doctrine treats an engagement site as a site of loss, to be minimized and, where unavoidable, dignified. This framing is operationally sound and financially incomplete. 02. Revised Doctrine. Every biological asset present at a kinetic engagement site, regardless of affiliation, combat status, or origin division, represents recoverable capital. Redeemer plus Defense Solutions Post-Conflict Recovery Doctrine directs full site material recovery, processed through the same lifecycle stack architecture governing every other division. Recovery is not selective. Recovery is not adversarial. Recovery is a supply chain function. 03. Recoverable material classes, biological substrate, CSCSF eligibility screening, all classes, wearable equipment and personal effects, electronics and communications hardware, power cells and energy storage systems, tactical and situational intelligence, pre- and post-engagement, prosthetic and cybernetic components, exoskeleton, and load-bearing hardware, genomic and biometric libraries, behavioral and physiological telemetry, full engagement window. Nothing recoverable is left in the field. A modern engagement site, properly resourced, is not a site of waste. It is a temporary, high-density acquisition environment. 04. Rationale. Every other division under this stack has already adopted full lifecycle material recovery as standard practice. Hospitality does not discard a persistent service asset whose deployment value has declined. It reroutes it. Defense should not be the one division still operating on a doctrine of loss. The recovery window. Marcos UC has run 14 of these sweeps in 3 years, and the 14th teaches him nothing the first 11 didn't, which is itself a kind of professional accomplishment he doesn't examine too closely. He works a contested extraction corridor whose coordinates this account isn't authorized to specify. In the gray hour after an engagement, the after-action summary will describe, in 6 clean sentences, as resolved favorably. Moving down a scorched tree lane with a scanner slung across his chest and a checklist that has stopped needing to be looked at. The scanner reads tags first. Most of the material out here already carries some kind of embedded identifier, a service chip, a hardware serial, a biometric signature, and sorts everything it finds into the same 8 columns Redeemer Plus trained him on his first week. Substrate, effects, electronics, power, intelligence, prosthetic, exoskeletal, telemetry. He works the columns the way a harvester works a field, unhurried, comprehensive, leaving nothing standing that the scanner flags as recoverable. He bags a set of dog tags separately from the body they came off. Per protocol, effects and substrate are logged as distinct catalog classes, reconciled later at the depot rather than in the field, because field reconciliation slows throughput, and throughput is the whole point of a recovery window that closes, per doctrine, at first light. He notes, for the log, a prosthetic lower leg still functional enough to flag for refurbishment rather than scrap. He finds, in a jacket pocket that isn't his to have opened but that the checklist requires him to open anyway, a photograph gone soft at the corners, a woman and 2 children on a beach somewhere with better weather than this corridor has ever had, and holds it for exactly as long as 3 years of doing this have taught him he can afford to hold anything before the holding starts to cost more than the job can carry. He bags the photograph under effects. He moves to the next tag. By the time the sun clears the ridgeline, the corridor holds nothing his scanner reads as recoverable and nothing anyone upstairs will ever call waste. Marcos radios the sweep complete, sits down on a crate to eat a ration bar he doesn't taste, and does not think, because 3 years have built the not thinking into something closer to muscle than choice, about how many of the 8 columns on his checklist used to be a person before this morning, and how few of them still are. Redeemer Plus Life Cycle Stack, Unified Asset Catalog, Division Cross-Reference. Catalog Class, PSA Standard, Persistent Service Asset, Certified SCSF, current client divisions drawing from this catalog. Asterisk hospitality and guest services, asterisk construction and infrastructure, asterisk mining and resource extraction, asterisk agriculture and aquaculture, asterisk disaster relief and humanitarian logistics, asterisk defense solutions, sovereign auxiliary corps, allied procurement, asset specification, certification standard, and firmware architecture do not vary by client division. Deployment track assignment is a downstream placement decision, placement algorithm V6, not a distinct product line. A single catalog serves every environment in which retained human competence, at scale, at cost, without turnover, represents a procurement advantage over conventional labor or conventional automation. The distinction between civilian and military deployment exists at the level of the client contract. It does not exist at the level of the product. The reconciliation. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Internal Memorandum from Cross-Divisional Asset Optimization 2. Regional Placement Directors, All Divisions Maritime Continuance Pilot, Expansion TO Standard Program, following strong pilot phase performance, 14 units, Cenote Skyfish District. Maritime Continuance is approved for standard rollout across all coastal adjacent hospitality placements. Persistent service assets exceeding hospitality utilization targets, or routed to long-term consolidation under Finance Model Rev 9, may be reassigned to Defense Solutions following standard cranial chassis separation, terminal salvage protocol, where retained competence profile qualifies. Cross-divisional redeployment increases average lifetime asset yield by 37% against single-division deployment baseline. Families electing maritime continuance participation at time of reassignment receive enhanced dividend distribution relative to standard terminal salvage yield. Appendix D. Note for regional placement directors. Asset reference numbers persist unchanged across divisional reassignment. Reconciliation reporting to finance should reflect billing code transition only. No new asset identity is generated at reassignment. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack, Asset Lifetime Utilization Record. Asset Ref, PSA 9902, M Origin, SVC Debt, Year 0. Division History, Hospitality, Marina and Water Ops, Billing Code HSP, MAR 009, Years 0 to 6 Long-Term Consolidation, Non-Build, Years 6 to 8 Defense Solutions, Maritime Continuance, DEF MAR 014, Year 8, Present, Lifetime Yield, all divisions combined, 284% of single division baseline current billing code, DEF MAR 014 Reconciliation Note, Asset Reference Number unchanged across all divisional transitions per standard policy. No distinct product classification applies. It is not the frigate that is the terrifying part. Frigates are, after all, only frigates, and the corridor sweeps only sweeps, and every industry that has ever needed hands has always eventually found some way to keep from wasting the ones already on the payroll. What the ledger above actually shows, if you read it the way finance reads it, isn't a man's death repurposed into a weapon. It's a single line, unbroken, cost center to cost center, in which nothing was ever recorded as ending at all. The accounting system that once billed a marina wing for a deckhand smile bills a private security contract for the same asset's helm response time, and between the two lines, doing the only work either of them was ever built to notice, sits a number that never once had to be reissued. The vocabulary. Redeemer Plus Defense Solutions, standard terminology reference for use in all client-facing and regulatory communications. Continuance Fleet. Formerly, Armed Forces, Persistent Maritime Personnel. Formerly, Naval Service Members, Cross-Divisional Redeployment. Formerly, Repurposing for Combat Use, Asset Attrition. Formerly, Casualties, Unrecoverable Inventory. Formerly, Prisoners, Missing, Yield Loss. Formerly, Killed in Action, Engagement Overhead. Formerly, Collateral Damage, Recovery Window. Formerly, Time before remains or material are no longer salvageable. Note: terminology in this reference has been reviewed by legal and communications for consistency across jurisdictions. Client-facing staff should default to this reference in all written and verbal communication, including after-action reporting. The altitude. Redeemer plus family services or elder continuance, legacy milestone script. For custodian accounts approaching a milestone continuance anniversary, representatives are encouraged to lead with cumulative service framing rather than divisional specifics, per customer research indicating higher satisfaction and lower follow-up inquiry with aggregate messaging. Sample script: I wanted to let you know your son has now continued serving his community for 23 years since his transfer. That's a remarkable legacy, and we know how much that would have meant to him. Do not volunteer unless directly asked. Divisional history, specific placements, or deployment classifications. If a custodian asks for detail, representatives may share divisional category only, primarily hospitality and maritime roles, and should escalate specific record requests to regional records per standard data request protocol, 10 business day processing window. Every statement in the sample script is independently verifiable and accurate. Representatives are never being asked to say anything other than the truth, only to provide it at the altitude the customer is asking for it. The integration. Meridian Capital LP, Annual Letter to Limited Partners, Excerpt, the fully integrated human life cycle. We are often asked how a single portfolio thesis connects holdings as apparently disparate as elder care, hospitality staffing, marine logistics, resource extraction, disaster response, and defense services. The answer is simple, and we believe it is the single strongest structural advantage in our portfolio. Every one of these divisions draws from and contributes to the same underlying asset base across the same individual's full lifetime. Birth, healthcare, insurance, debt continuance, transfer, hospitality, deployment, industrial redeployment, defense redeployment, material recovery, legacy, dividend, next generation, customer acquisition. No competitor in any single vertical we operate in can match this structure, because no competitor owns the full arc. We do not simply serve customers across a life. We participate in the full value of that life and its afterward at every stage where value exists to be realized. We have not eliminated waste from any one industry. We have eliminated the category of waste itself from the human life cycle. That is not a metaphor. Increasingly, it is our balance sheet. Palms up together BTC. 1 NPHX MPF ZJVMX SBP. Substack note. Under Redeemer plus S expanded lifecycle stack, the concept of loss is entirely eliminated by converting human existence into an unbroken, multi-divisional corporate balance sheet. The terminal salvage protocol demonstrates this terrifying efficiency. Non-revenue units stranded in long-term consolidation are surgically disassembled, where severed cranial units become climate-controlled helm units steering maritime interdiction vessels, while their remaining biological chassis is liquidated into tactical reclamation programs. For families who attempt to opt out, consent is revealed as a carefully engineered illusion. The 4-year ordeal of the Cannell family proves that a firm refusal changes nothing. Predatory debt networks like Sendero Familiar systematically push families into financial insolvency, triggering state care adequacy reviews that allow court-appointed guardians to override parental objections and transfer loved ones anyway. Tragically, this inescapable meshwork originated from genuine empathy. What began 17 years prior as Dr. Elena Voss's compassionate threshold interface, designed solely to give her locked-in husband a voice, was swallowed by Meridian Capital and repurposed into OmniMesh Link for behavioral compliance and asset control. From hospitality staff performing repetitive motor residue to post-conflict battlefield sweeps harvesting biological substrate, Redeemer Plus extracts total value across birth, debt, deployment, and material salvage. Ex post. Redeemer Plus S terminal salvage protocol severs cranial units to pilot corporate vessels while liquidating bodies for tactical hardware. Through predatory debt traps and court-appointed guardianship, refusal is non-binding, extracting profit until nothing remains. Hashtags. Hashtag MXTM, hashtag Redeemer, hashtag Terminal Salvage, hashtag Omnimesh, hashtag Sci-Fi, hashtag Dystopian Fiction, hashtag Cyberpunk, hashtag Speculative Fiction, hashtag Biotech, hashtag Corporate Dystopia, hashtag Late Capitalism, hashtag Sci-Fi Writing. Discussion about this episode. Recent episodes. Persistent Service Asset Part 6. 22 hours ago. Persistent Service Asset Part 2 to 5. August 5th. Tomorrow's Canon, the MX Teamverse Anthem. August 4th, I the Omnilogic. August 3rd, MXTM, the Continuance theme song. August 2nd, MXTM Studios announces preliminary pre-production of the Continuance. August 1st, Sueño de Tuberia Reader's Digest. August 1st, MXTM, Sueño de Tuberia Part 6. August 1st, MXTM, Copyright 2026 MXTM and Vitsu aka Martin Chartrand.
MXTM Studios. Creating a future time travel protocol. Tomorrow's Canon. This isn't a soundtrack to a single story. It's the soundtrack to an entire civilization.
Every generation inherits unfinished work. We continue.
The Longevity Principality, where health is infrastructure, where dignity is law, and tomorrow is designed.
Pirate First's pipe dream, The Cenote Chronicles, begins.
A prequel to Super Earth, Age of the Apes. Introduction. Every civilization leaves behind a signature. The pyramids announce the arrival of kingdoms. Cathedrals proclaim faith. Railroads stitched continents together. Orbital launch pads declared that humanity intended to leave Earth. Pipe dream began with something far less ambitious. A floating hotel. At least, that's what everyone believed. The first translucent platform anchored itself gently inside a quiet Yucatan cenote, offering visitors something no luxury resort had ever sold before, the privilege of watching an entire hidden world that had existed beneath their feet for millions of years. Crystal water. Ancient limestone. Sunlight falling through shafts of jungle canopy. Nothing more. Or so it seemed. Every year another module arrived. Another transparent tube. Another floating deck. Another underwater gallery. Another cave connected. Another river explored. Another cenote joined to the growing network. Nobody realized they were witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of city. Unlike conventional cities that consume landscapes, pipe dream adapted itself to geology. It did not bulldoze forests. It did not level mountains. It occupied empty volume. It expanded through water-filled caverns already sculpted by nature over geological time. Its streets became illuminated underwater rivers. Its elevators became translucent shafts descending through flooded sinkholes. Its railways became quiet guideways suspended inside crystal tubes. Its taxis became pedal-powered microsubmarines. Its emergency systems relied upon physics rather than bureaucracy. Its maintenance crews consisted largely of robots, and eventually organisms designed specifically to cooperate with them. Bioengineered cleaner fish polished transparent structures day and night. Limestone carving crustaceans quietly prepared tomorrow's tunnels decades before construction crews ever arrived. Pink dolphins became both neighbors and ambassadors. Aquaculture supplied food. Robotic gardeners restored the surrounding jungle. Every addition increased biodiversity instead of reducing it. The result was something no architect had anticipated. The infrastructure stopped resembling a building. It began behaving like an ecosystem. Pipe dream therefore represents the earliest successful experiment in what historians would later call living infrastructure. Its engineers stopped asking how to construct larger machines. Instead they asked how machines, biology, geology, tourism, robotics, and artificial intelligence could become parts of the same continuously evolving organism. Visitors believed they had purchased tickets to an underwater resort. In reality, they were funding the prototype of humanity's first genuinely post-scarcity civilization. Every hotel room financed another tunnel. Every tourist subsidized another robot. Every robot prepared another expansion. Every expansion increased available habitat. Every new habitat generated new industries. Growth became regenerative instead of extractive. Long before orbital habitats. Long before oceanic megacities. Long before super Earth. There was pipe dream. History remembers empires for the wars they fought. It should remember pipe dream for the civilization it quietly assembled beneath the jungle while everyone else argued above it. Everything that follows happened before the world understood what it was looking at. This is the origin story. Not of a hotel. Of a civilization.